Hey there, and welcome to my strategy guide for Fel Lord Zakuun on normal or heroic difficulty as relevant to healers. You can use the guide below to skip to specific abilities and phases if you wish. This encounter cycles between two distinct phases, where Zakuun is armed and disarmed, whilst tanks have their own separate phase. Phase 1 begins as Zakuun is engaged, and this is an armed phase. Armed phases last 90 seconds. He will periodically spawn 4 waves of destruction by casting Cavitation, where he swings his axe at the raid, and which should be avoided by players to reduce taking unnecessary damage, except in the cases I'm about to mention. Twice in this phase, he will summon Rumbling Fissures. All but one of these must be soaked by one raid member each. You should choose not to soak the fissure which spawns closest to the encounter entrance. Upon soaking a rumbling fissure, the player who does so will receive a debuff called Latent Energy that lasts 30 seconds, and they will explode upon contact with a wave of destruction or another rumbling fissure, doing damage to the entire raid via Unleashed Energy. These players should avoid waves of destruction. A Fel Crystal will erupt from the fissure that was not soaked. These exist for 90 seconds, deal light damage in 3-second pulses to the raid, and must be protected by players from Wake of Destruction waves, or else they will trigger Unleashed Energy and do raid-wide damage. If you try to soak all the fissures that spawn, the Fel Crystal will spawn randomly at one of the fissure locations. This is why you don't soak all of them, so that you can control where the Fel Crystal will spawn. Ideally, you want them to be grouped up in one area of the room. During this phase, the tank will become disembodied and they will be sent into the Shadow Realm. As a healer, you don't have to worry about what they do in there, but as I understand it, they spend 15 seconds jumping over waves of destruction and just try and survive. Just be aware that there will be tank swapping because of this, and for 15-second intervals, one tank will be unhealable. Lastly, in this phase, Zakuun will be periodically casting Foul, which places a debuff on a few random raid members called Befouled. This absorbs a moderate amount of incoming healing. When enough healing has been absorbed, Foul Explosion will be triggered, which deals damage to players in 6 yards of the affected player. Players should move out of the raid with this and be healed until Foul Explosion is triggered. After 90 seconds, Zakuun will enter the Disarmed Phase, where he hurls his axe onto the ground near Gramash and jumps to the opposite side of the room. The axe does raid-wide damage every 3 seconds in this phase. Disarmed phases last 30 seconds. He will now do damage to the tank with aggro and his nearest player simultaneously via heavy-handed, and players must not stand in front of the boss. Both tanks should stack to ensure this damage is split between them. Tank damage in this phase is also particularly high since the boss gains a large amount of haste. Twice in this phase, he places a debuff called Seed of Destruction on a few random raid members. Affected players must immediately move to the opposite side of the room where the Fel Crystals are not placed and away from where the raid is stacking. When this debuff expires, 8 waves of destruction will be emitted radially around the player. This player must ensure to stand still while these waves are emitted, or they might take damage from their own waves and die. You cannot stack players with this debuff on top of each other, since this causes massive damage to the entire raid and will definitely wipe you. They must spread. I assume this is because it triggers Unleashed Energy, but I'm not 100% sure. The rest of the raid should protect the Fel Crystals and those with Latent Energy from these waves, whilst also avoiding taking unnecessary damage from them. Raid damage in this phase can be very high and will require cooldowns. At 30% health, or after a second disarm phase, Zakuun will enrage and begin to use abilities from both armed and disarmed phases. As in armed phases, he will continue to spawn fissures, cast Befouled, and create waves of destruction by swinging his axe. As in disarmed phases, he will continue to split damage between both tanks, emit raid-wide damage every 3 seconds, and place Seed of Destruction on random players, which now has a slightly shorter debuff duration. Raid damage in this phase is extremely high, and your raid will require every cooldown available to survive. So, that brings this guide to an end. Good luck in the encounter, and feel free to give the video a thumbs up if you found it useful, comment if you have any questions or suggestions, and subscribe for more.